All right. Okay, so you have it under control. So welcome back, everybody. It is an incredibly proud day for me to be introducing to you Marco Calamandrei and Jacopo De Maio. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing your names correctly, but you,
Perfect.
all right, but you will forgive me because my heart's at the right place. Now, Marco and Jacopo both were students in my advanced derivatives course at the University of Maryland. And, Wen Lee has actually presented to this course. And as you know, Wen Lee was the teaching assistant for both Marco and Jacopo. And she also thinks very highly of these two wonderful people, as I do. As I have told you before, I am a very religious Hindu, and part of the Hindu tradition is the relationship between the teacher and student. And the greatest teacher, as we say in the Hindu scriptures, is one whose students exceed the teacher. So by that token, Marco and Jacopo, I am the greatest teacher of them all. You make me immensely proud by the amount of work you have done in your course, and since then with all your writings that I've seen. And something that I found out recently, my wife actually pointed it out to me, that now that Bocconi University, where both of them are students at, has the best econometrics program outside of the US and the UK, which is, quite something if you think about it. So not a surprise at all how wonderfully both Marco and Jacopo have performed in my class and since then. So it is with enormous pleasure that I pass on the baton to you. Take it on.
Thank you. That's too much, Rajiv. Now expectations are very high and I need to satisfy you. I really feel the pressure on it. Okay, so if we get started, our presentation is about European capital markets, as we are European and we are both Italians. And as Rajiv said, we went to UMD as exchange students, and we had the pleasure to meet our professor that, as he says, is firstly a friend, a consultant, and then a professor. So exploit your friendship with Rajiv because it's a very, 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 very kind person, and I'm really thankful to him, as it's not for all to present, a presentation in front of a class from the other side of the world. So thank you very much, Rajiv, and I will get started. So let's go. This is our outlook. We wanted to present European capital markets, giving an outlook on an introduction on legislation about Europe and some differences with the US, and that is the main capital market in the world. And then we decided to give a special focus to equity markets, bond markets, and derivative markets, so you can have an idea of what's going on in our world and what's going on our capital markets. And we added a little reference to the recent COVID crisis. So Marco will talk about some implications of the recent crisis. Okay. First of all, we have to say that European Union is different from Europe as a continent, as European Union is a political and economic supranational union of 27 nations. It used to be 28, but in January we had Brexit. And out of those 27, 19 countries share the same currency, that is the euro, that has been created in 2002 after many treaties. Just to mention, the first European treaty dates back to 1951 and was the Economic Community for Carbon and Iron, and was an economic treaty. And it's quite ancient union between countries. As you can see, we have many different countries from all over the European continent, and in my opinion, and of course in the European view, our role is to try to give our opinion about the geopolitical world scenario, about all the world questions that rise, and it is a reaction to the power of US and China that otherwise would contend the leadership of the economic and the geopolitical scenario. Okay, so the main difference that we need to mention is that United States are a federal nation. So as you can see, the Article 1 of the Constitution gives competences to the Congress, and federal states have residual powers, while the European Union is a system that is made up of different individual member states who were once individual, as I said, and so governments through years tried to transfer part of their powers to EU governing bodies that are European Commission, European Council, and so we have a distinction between the monetary policy and the fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is governed by national governments, while monetary policy is decided by the governing bodies of the EU, such as the ECB, European Central Bank. So given this introduction, we can understand that each European member state was an individual state, so it had its own legislation, its own capital market, and obviously its own exchange in which stocks were traded. So during the years, European authorities and governments are trying to harmonize a European capital market so that each country shares its strengths and its weaknesses between all the European states. Okay, just to give you an outlook of numbers, we can see the comparison between European Union and the United States and China in terms of inhabitants, surface, GDP, that is probably the most important thing we will look, and the risk-free rate and the number of states. One particular thing I want to highlight is that in Europe, the risk-free rate is the German bond, and we have negative rates in Europe since 2012. After the sovereign debt crisis that Marco will explain later. And this is causing so many problems for European monetary policy. Then I want to share with you the main exchanges in Europe. As you can see, I included the London Stock Exchange because otherwise I would not mention the second biggest stock exchange, even if we had Brexit. I thought it would be fair, and also because LSE merged with the Italian stock exchange, Borsa Italiana, so that I had to mention. Sorry. Okay, we can see that Euronext is the first one, and it has 4.7 trillion in market capitalization and more than 1,200 listed companies. And Euronext resulted from the merger of Amsterdam, Paris, and Brussels stock exchanges that occurred in 2000. London Stock Exchange, as well, as I said, merged with Borsa Italiana and created the LSE Group in 2007. It's the second biggest stock exchange in Europe and has 4.2 trillion and 2,400 companies listed. And the third one is the Deutsche Börse, that after failing the attempt to merge with Euronext and LSE Group, remained individual and has nearly 2 trillion of market cap and more than 500 listed companies. Just to highlight something, these three stock exchanges, these three exchanges in Europe, all resulted from a common factor, that is the merger. In my opinion, and I can say that this is to compete with bigger players in the exchange in exchanges in the world, such as the U.S. market and Chinese market, Japan market. One thing I need to mention is that the London Stock Exchange Group failed last year to merge with the Hong Kong Stock Exchange after rejecting a 27 billion pounds offer. So it was a good amount of money, but to keep their independence, mainly, they rejected the offer. Okay, as you can see from the graph, equity markets are much more developed in US, and we are going with 25 trillion euros of market cap. And as you can see, China, 27 countries of EU and Japan and UK are they lie far behind. And also we can notice two different trends. So for example, if we analyze EU 27, Japan and UK, we can see a smoother progression of market capitalization of equity markets, while China and US show the graph shows a surge, especially in last 10 years when markets really developed very, very fast. And as we can see, the US is outstanding, but other stock exchange equity markets are of comparable measure, between 10 and 5 trillion euros, billion euros, sorry. No, that is trillion, sorry, sorry again. But as you know, numbers on their own do not tell so much. So we need to compare the equity market capitalization with the GDP to have an idea of how the equity market developed in comparison to the country GDP. That is like a measure of development for a country, and of even for wellness of people if you divide by the population. So we can see that the first player is Switzerland, which I did not include in our presentation, as Switzerland has always behaved like an individual country and has never adopted euro, has never joined the European treaties, and decided to maintain its independence, but has a very developed equity market. Second and third place are occupied by US and Japan, that have equity market capitalization higher than the GDP in terms of 1.6 and 1.5, as you can see. So very developed capital markets. Also the UK, which left European Union, as I said, has a ratio of more than one, higher than one, which reflects their Anglo-Saxon blood, so that capital markets are a good source of financing for companies. And also we can see from the graph, from the histogram, China and EU. China has a ratio of nearly one, I can see, but is developing very, very fast, has a GDP growth of more than 6%, while the European Union has, I can say, that suffers from the continental blood that sees banks and private financing as a main source of funds for companies. And in fact,
quick question for you.
Yes, Rajiv, sorry.
Now, in China, one of the reasons for this high ratio for China is a lot of the the government-owned companies are actually also listed on the equity stock market. What is the situation in Europe? What about government-owned or government-controlled organizations? Are they not listed? Is that why it is lower?
Yes. Okay. In Europe, countries and governments usually control strategic assets, so that, for example, travel companies like each European country has its own flight company, as well as defense companies. For example, in Italy, we have one of the best defense company and aerospatial companies, that is Leonardo, that competes with the true giants such as Airbus and Boeing.
Competes,
And
more or less.
it tries to. I try to be patriotic, so.
That's okay.
But you know, the problem is that we're, as Europeans, we are now discovering that if we are united, we can compete with world giants like US and China. So for the past 30 years, we've all played our game on our own basis, and so each of the EU states, EU nations, were much weaker than bigger players in the world. And also, as I said, negative rates are an indicator for the stagnancy of the European economic, in my opinion.
Also means that debt financing is pretty cheap, much cheaper than
yes,
in the US.
Yes, right? We try to give privilege to banks and other asset transformers, other source of financing for companies, especially for the fact because that our companies are much smaller than American ones, so they prefer not to be subject to capital markets regulation legislation that is more strict, that is much stricter than, you know, not listed companies. And Italy is a good example of it, because we have so many mid-cap companies, small cap companies, while we have very few large companies that can then have money and possibility to get listed. That's the main reason, I think. That's a matter of mentality, also a matter of mentality.
Okay.
Okay, now you can see the main equity indices. I tried to select the most important one. For example, the FTSE is the Italian one and collects the top 40 capitalization companies. IBEX is for the index for Spain. The CAC 40 is from France. The EAX 25 is the Netherlands, the Dutch stock index. Euronext has its headquarters in Amsterdam, Brussels, and Paris. So it collects companies from these three countries and some others that I listed in the next slide. And we have the DAX 30, that is the German one. Eurostoxx is the I can say the competitor of Euronext for the Deutsche Börse in Germany. And the BEL 20 is the Belgium stock index, and I have a list and you can check later. And then I wanted to show you the largest companies for market capitalization in Europe, which at first sight you can see are not even comparable to the magnitude of American companies. The biggest one is LVMH, that you probably know for Louis Vuitton and Dom Perignon and very famous brands, and is located in France and has more than 200 billion market cap, which is, I don't know, 1/5 of Amazon, Apple, yes. So dimensions in Europe are smaller with respect to American ones. And one thing I need to mention is that in recent years, nations like Netherlands and Ireland are becoming like fiscal heavens, fiscal paradise in Europe within the European thresholds, and they have a very favorable tax rate, so that many European companies decide to move from their home country to Netherlands and Ireland to pay less taxes, and so that you can see the Royal Dutch Shell and Medtronic and Accenture that has the headquarter, the European headquarter in Ireland, due to the favorable tax rate. And we can see that it goes from $200 billion to less than $130 billion. And so I wanted to highlight the magnitude between the European largest companies and American largest companies. It is not even comparable. I don't know, probably the sum of all these these stocks gets the market capitalization of Amazon, of Microsoft. Probably some more. And we can see that like Royal Dutch Shell, Total are oil companies, or L'Oreal, LMH are France companies that are operating in the retail industry. Anheuser, Busch, InBev, I don't know how to read because this is Northern Europe language, is a beverage company. And Accenture, as you know, is the consulting company. Now I leave the floor to my colleague Marco, and he will explain bond markets and derivative markets.
Okay, thank you, Jacopo. Can I try to share the presentation? If you stop sharing the screen, I think I can.
Okay.
Okay, and just to add upon what Jacopo have just said, can you see my screen right now?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. So just a second. Okay, so just to add a little bit of detail on what Jacopo just said, just to give you an idea, flavor of what we're talking here. The entire market capitalization of the main Italian stock index is roughly the market cap of JP Morgan. So just to give you a picture. And yeah, so let's talk about the bond market. It is a very important market in Europe. It size around 20 trillion euros. And it is roughly 150% of GDP. But as Jacopo has already said, most of the companies here are small and medium enterprises. In Italy, the percentage is around 99% of all the companies out there. And so the most typical way of financing is through the banking system, and for larger companies, also syndicated loans. But here, let's have a look on the bond market in general. One very crucial aspect here is that you have just one central bank for 20, for, okay, let's say 19 countries. Sometimes it's reeling, it's like you have the feeling of being in a house with 19 roommates and common rules. So this is, a kind of issue because all countries have different needs and, economies. And in order to align the economic fundamentals, for example, in 1998, the Stability and Growth Pact has been, signed. That is basically is a treaty in order aimed at, level off all the countries and try to set common rule, especially for budgets, budget laws, actually. As Jacopo said, the riskless asset is the German Bund. And sorry, Rajiv, can you hear me well? I forgot. Okay, wonderful. So you will forgive me if I go a little bit back in time, but that's another striking difference with the US, because you had just the great financial crisis in 2008. We had another one that was the sovereign debt crisis. As you can appreciate from this graph, you see that since the introduction of the euro in 2000, basically, you see that the spreads between different sovereign bonds, the yields of sovereign bonds, those spreads were almost zero. meaning that, you know, Greece paid the same as Germany and Italy and all the rest. So you see that after the great financial crisis, basically starting in 2010, you see these spreads, these yields diverging. Why? Because there was a change in the risk aversion of investors who started pricing, call it credit risk, redenomination risk, whatever. But the point is that, you know, you had diverging yields on sovereign bonds. And actually, the ECB, the European Central Bank, reacted with the quantitative easing in 2015 and ultra low interest rates. But really, a very important point in time was 2012, when Mario Draghi announced the OMTs. So basically, that's the famous speech, whatever it takes. Probably you are already familiar with that, but basically those were policies, were, you know, a monetary tool, never implemented. OMTs have never been implemented, but the aim of this new tool was exactly to close spreads between different countries. And then you have, of course, the QE in 2015. And last but not least, we slash interest rate to 0 and even negative. So, and you know, that was not something that we did just 1 year. We have negative interest rates, basically. Okay, depends on what you compute, how you compute them, but basically 2015 with the quantitative easing, you can see it from the graph, right? And the point is that we enter in this crisis of COVID-19 with the, you know, main referencing rate at -0.5. So imagine if the Fed had not the possibility to cut interest rates. And, you know, that was our position. So we could not cut interest rate forward. Why? Because they were already negative. So you have probably already figured it out that, you know, having quantitative easing, having negative interest rates had several effects on the economy and on financial markets. So I just listed a few of them. For example, this is a very, you know, intuitive, I mean, that's a chart showing the correlation with the Japanese yen. Why? Because the euro started being sold in carry trades. So probably you are already familiar with carry trades, but that's basically, you know, a trade where investors borrow a currency with a low interest rate to buy securities in another currency where the interest rates are higher. So they gain on the spread of these two interest rates. And this is typically done selling, so borrowing Japanese yen. As you can see, since the implementation of this ultra expansionary monetary policy, the correlation with you know, the Japanese yen became positive. So that's, you know, just a quick and dirty measure of it. It's not very precise, of course. And then another very, very important effect is the amount of negative yielding bonds out there skyrocketed. This summer, I guess you remember when, you know, the amount of negative yielding bonds arrived to 17 trillion. And that's a problem. That's a very serious issue, especially for pension funds. Pension funds right now are struggling to deliver the returns promised. And so overall, this environment, because I cannot spend too much time talking about that, but basically the golden rule is that, of course, trivially, it favors borrowers while it penalizes investors, especially long-only investors such as pension funds. And so here you can see exactly what I have just said. So it is very much an advantage for borrowers. And you see here the activity in the primary market of corporate debt in Europe. And you see that since 2012, so since we started with ultra expansionary monetary policy, the amount of debt issued by companies skyrocketed. So it arrived at peak in 2019 with over 500 billion. And you see, of course, this is a report.
IG and non-IG?
Sorry, say again, Rashid?
So I see right in the left chart at the bottom, you have the legend IG and
investment grade and non-investment grade. Yeah. So yeah, then there is all the, you know, the theme. I could talk for hours about high yield bonds and, you know, but yeah, so basically it's all the bonds issued in Europe. Of course, this is taken from SG, the Société Générale, before the outbreak of coronavirus. And so the expected value for 2020 would be much lower because as you can see, the main problem, we are right now, at least in Europe, in liquidity crunch. So the problem is that it's very difficult for companies to refinance their debt because they cannot do new issues. I mean, during this crisis, this last month, you know, the number of bond issued dropped very much. And that's going to be a problem, of course, with the, you know, maturity wall. That's basically, you know, in the next 2 years, 5 years, basically there is a huge amount of debt to be repaid. But this is not just a problem of Europe. That's a common problem for everyone. So here is a very quick recap of 2019 for those of you who are interested. And we arrived to 2020. So the outbreak of COVID-19 is a very serious crisis. We're entering in a recession. Just a few hours ago, we had the report from the IMF, you know, the global economy, the GDP contracted by 0.1% this was after the great financial crisis. Now the estimate is 3%, minus 3%. So just to give you a feeling of how bad that's going to be. However, the response of the European Central Bank was actually very, I mean, in a certain sense, satisfying. Because why? Because they were fast. You know, this crisis is a liquidity crisis that will probably become a solvency crisis. So one element that you should take care of is the amount of money, the liquidity that you put in the system, but most importantly, not last but not least, also the timing. You must act very fast. And so here you see the pandemic emergency purchasing program that is basically 750 billion euros. And, you know, also commercial papers, not only bonds, are going to be purchased. And, you know, standards for collateral are going to be relaxed. And the last bullet point refers to, you know, the German bond, because of course the ECB has some rules according to which they cannot purchase more than a certain percentage of, you know, a given security issued. They cannot own more than 30% of all the German bonds out there. So, and they are close to this limit. Finally, very quickly, let's go through the derivative markets. It's a huge market. You can see that in 2018, it was 75 trillion, and OTC, so over the country, not listed. And you see, also in this case, that the European market is a little bit behind the US. Why? For a few regulations, really. For a few reasons. One of them is regulation. We have a stricter regulation with implementation of MiFID II. That's a very important theme in the industry. Secondly, also because most of these derivatives are interest rate derivatives, and, you know, it's not like ideal when you have interest rates flat at minus X% for 5 years. So, you know, we have a decrease also for that reason. And finally, a different market infrastructure. And this is actually true also for securitizations and securitized products. You can see from those charts that, you know, the US market is by far larger. And for two reasons, really. One of them is that you have many government-sponsored enterprises. And secondly, still regulation is very, very much strict here. So that was all. We are very glad to have this you know, presentation with you, and we are ready to answer to any of, you know, your questions. If you have any question at all, don't worry. We are glad to answer.
Questions, anybody?
No question. So if the interest rate goes to negative, how do you evaluate the risk?
Very good question. What happened to discounted cash flows and
yeah.
Okay, so Jacopo, can I take it?
And insurance value, everything that we did, right, Sheng?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, DCF goes it does not becomes useless, but you need to make some adjustments, and
Okay.
Marco wants to take it, so I will leave it to him.
Okay, because I had the same doubt. And so basically for DCF, if you think about it, it is not always the problem. You can make adjustments, and there are some models that incorporate it, but basically for the majority of companies, the interest rates are very, very low, but not negative. So for the majority of the companies out there, for derivatives, well, that's a problem. You have so many models that adjust for that. The basic thing is that no, Black-Scholes doesn't work anymore. If, you know,
you try to use some spreads to adjust interest rate, the riskless rate. And so, for example, if you want to value a company in Italy, you need to add the credit risk for Italy, which translates into default spread and the credit spread. Then I'm sure that Italian companies are valued with positive interest rates.
What's the kind of spread between the German, you know, very average German and Italian?
2,000 basis points on average,
Oh, yes.
but really depends. It's actually very, very high, and it depends on the moment in which you're looking at it, because it's very volatile. Now, for example, it would be 150. It really changes, but that's
For
high.
example, I had to do classwork with some teammates, and Marco was not included this time. But we got the 30 years German bond at minus 35 basis point, and we added a spread of 2,200 basis point for the riskless rate of Italian companies.
Okay. Oh, which
So
brings that much more in kind of a similarity with the US market for it.
between 1.5 and 2%, I would say this.
And if I can add on this, so basically just to give you a flavor of what we are living here. So basically the entire yield curve of Germany is in negative territory, I guess, I'm pretty sure of that. While the spread with you know, Italian government bond, you know, if you look at the spread, that is a spread that is not appropriate for an investment grade bond. So it should be high yield. But, you know, fortunately, I would say that, that's a thing. So basically, if you have a country such as Italy, and that is investment grade, right? So let's say you work at Moody's, and you see that according to your model, Italy should not be investment grade anymore. So you downgrade it, it becomes junk. As a consequence, many funds, mutual funds, pension funds, all of them are obliged, they are forced to sell your security. You have a political crisis, social crisis. So very much the rating is a political act. That's really, you know, a consideration that you should consider when you look at those grading ratings. Sorry.
Other questions? Sorry if we take too long. We are very emotional.
No, this is great. Thank you very much, Marco and Jacopo. Shall we all give them a big hand?
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
It's always a pleasure, yeah.
It's wonderful to see you all again. All right. So Marco and Jacopo, we'll catch up again soon. And the rest of you have a great week. If you have, as I mentioned, I have posted the presentation on Blackboard. And if you have any questions, I'm going to volunteer Marco and Jacopo's email address.
Yes, in case we put the email address, yes, you can share. And if questions, please.
Excellent. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.